Hello, class. We are about to go over the lecture entitled Change and Intervention. What I would like for you guys to do is take out your book, take out the article that referenced the case study, and also I emailed a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted you guys to print so that way you can go along with me with the lecture. I like to use the PowerPoint handouts because it's easy to write notes on and it's easy to follow along with my lectures. So let's take a look at the second slide, which we're going to go over, which it states the objectives. Various types of interventions that occur in change, identify change management activities, types of resistance might occur to change, and how do you choose appropriate instruments to measure change. These are the following objectives that we will cover today in this lecture. Now first, let's go into the third slide, which identifies the types of interventions. Would anyone like to volunteer to read? Okay. Now before we do this, I just want to ask a question just before we begin, just to get an idea of what you guys think this particular lecture is going to be about. Change and intervention. Does anyone have some input that they want to give in reference to what they may think the premise to the change and intervention lecture? Good. Okay. Awesome. All right, let's continue. Types of interventions: human process interventions, technostructural interventions, human resource management interventions, and strategic interventions. Now we're going to take a look at the first one. Let's move on to page 4, and it's human process interventions. I want to reference before we begin a chart in the book, and it's in chapter 9, page 157. This chart actually goes over the types of interventions and organizational levels, and we're going to go over each one of these sub headings under each intervention very briefly. Don't want to take up a lot of time, but as you see, they have it broken down into categories to where they can be implemented. So you have primary organization levels affected, how it's affected in the individual sector, the group, and on the organization level. So when you get some time, you may want to look over that chart, but let's continue. Human process interventions. Human process intervention is individually focused. According to Cummins and Worley, human process interventions derive mainly from the disciplines of psychology and social psychology and the applied fields of group dynamics and human relations. Under human process interventions, you have the following: process consultation, third-party interventions, team building, organization confrontation meeting, intergroup relations, interventions, and large group interventions. This is particularly focused on the human process side to intervention when it comes in reference to change. Whenever a change is about to be implemented within a company, there's different intervention approaches that can be taken, and this is discussing the human process interventions. So now we're going to look at the various processes under the human process intervention. Turn with me to page 5, the next page. Process consultation. The process consultation focuses on relations and social dynamics occurring in work groups, and the aim is to help members gain the skills and understanding necessary to identify and solve problems themselves. Now, this particular approach is self-centered, so it's more of a individualistic approach. However, it doesn't identify that in the book, but I would think that this will give people the tools to help them come to a conclusion in reference to a solution themselves. Let's go to the next one, which is the third-party intervention. This change method is a form of process consultation aimed at the dysfunctional interpersonal relations in organizations and in third-party intervention. It helps people resolve conflict through such methods as problem solving, bargaining, and conciliation. And let's look at the next. Team building. This particular intervention helps work groups become more effective in accomplishing work groups and tasks. And also members of the group diagnose group processes and solutions to problems. And that's more in a group setting. That's more based upon the interaction amongst each other in a group setting. Next, we have organizational confrontation meeting. This change method mobilized organization members to identify problems, set actions, targets, and begin working on problems. And this intervention generally includes various groupings of employers in identifying and solving problems. So this basically saying that it includes various sectors within an organization, whether it be, the HR and the various departments. Intergroup relations. These interventions are designed to improve interactions among different groups or departments in organizations, and this often involves a consultant helping two groups understand the cause of their conflict and choose appropriate solutions. More like a mediation. And we have large group interventions. These interventions involve getting a broad variety of stakeholders into a large meeting to clarify important values, to develop new ways of working, to articulate a new vision for the organization, or to solve pressing organizational problems. Now let's look at the next intervention. Now, before we continue, does anyone have any questions about the human process interventions? Okay. Now, if you look on page 156, it goes into further detail about each individual subheading under the human process interventions. To give you a better and clearer understanding, you may want to read over that if you haven't already. Technostructural interventions. Technostructural interventions focus on productivity, organizational efficiency. According to Cummings and Worley, technostructural interventions are rooted in the disciplines of engineering, sociology, psychology, and in the applied fields of social technical systems organization designs. There are 3 of these interventions, and they consist of structural designs, downsizing, and re-engineering. Alright, so let's look at structural design. The change process concerns the organization's division of labor, include moving from more traditional ways of dividing the organization's overall work. Now, this is more so of depriving from the more structural type of design, the more concrete, more together type of design. And this is kind of deprived from that. If you refer to your book, and if everyone goes with me to the book, and you go on page 158, it goes into further details about the diagnostic guidelines exist to determine which structure is appropriate for a particular organization's environment, technologies, and conditions. That's the structural design. That's what the makeup of the structural design is. And if you look with me, it goes into downsizing. This intervention reduces costs and bureaucracy by decreasing the size of the organization through personnel layoffs, organization redesign, and outsourcing. Now, I can definitely speak on this particular intervention because it's very common to see companies do such things as layoffs, organization redesign, and outsourcing. Outsourcing has become so popular now. Like I said, I've worked for various companies that outsource, such as Apple, such as Sprint, such as Comcast, Intuit. These are major players in our companies throughout the stock market. They have resorted to outsourcing, and I'm saying like overseas. A lot of people outsource within the United States, but there are a lot of outsourcing going on with overseas companies hiring customer service agents and technical support agents. And also downsizing is very common, especially when technology allows for the ability to downsize. Whereas a particular task was done with humans, now it's done by machinery and robots. Let's continue. Does anyone want to give an input about downsizing? I know that's something that has hit home for a lot of people. Anyone? Awesome. Let's continue. Re-engineering results in a faster, more responsive performance. It is often accomplished with new information technology that permits employees to control and coordinate work processes more effectively. And that kind of piggybacks into my statement in reference to some of the various tasks now are being done by robots or being done with machinery. Now, it will allow for more efficiency, but less hands on deck. And that has a lot to do with our job market and how it is affecting people with the different technologies that are being created. It's a positive thing for on a company perspective, but on a worldwide global perspective, it can be kind of disheartening for some people because a lot of jobs are lost because of this. Let's continue. Now we're going to go to the next intervention, which is the human resource management interventions. Now, these particular interventions states that are centered around the HR practices and career development. Human resource management interventions are rooted in labor relations and an applied practice of compensation and benefits, employee selection and placement, performance appraisal, and career development. This intervention includes goal setting, performance appraisal, reward system, coaching and mentoring, career planning, development interventions, management and leadership development, workforce diversity interventions, and employee stress and wellness interventions. Very, very, very common intervention. I would think that in the industrial organizational field of psychology, that this particular intervention would be something that we as IO psychologists would be engulfed in, considering that it's more rooted in the HR perspective. Um, I would think that it would be more of something that we would have our hands on. Now, under this umbrella, there are the goal setting. The change program involves setting clear, challenging goals and attempts to improve organization effectiveness by establishing a better fit between personnel and organizational objectives. Goal setting is so very, very important because it basically makes a clear mapping to what, as a whole, the company expects from employers, as well as what to expect out of from a company setting as a whole and individually. You can yourself set goals within the company that embody the organization and what the objective is as a whole within any company, and doing that allows for everybody to reach their goals with the best interest of the company staying the main focus. Next, we have performance appraisal. The intervention is a systematic process of jointly assessing work-related achievement, strengths and weakness, and performance appraisal represents an important link between goal setting and reward system. And I have to agree with that statement because it's very, very important to know that what the goal is, what you have to do to execute the goal and make it a reality and achieve that goal. And then once you are able to do that, to make sure that you're receiving proper edification for the effort that you've done for the betterment of the company. No one wants to work for a company that does not appreciate their efforts. And that brings me to reward systems. The intervention involves the design of organizational rewards to improve employee satisfaction and performance, which includes pay, promotion, and fringe benefits. Next, we have coaching and mentoring. This intervention helps managers and executives to clarify their goals, deal with potential stumbling blocks, and improve their performance, and mostly involves a one-on-one relationship between organizational development practitioners. Now, I think this particular sector of intervention is so important, coaching and mentoring, because it helps the change, it brings the change into submission, meaning it gets the ball rolling. Because what it does is it's a guided map. When you have coaching and mentoring, it makes it very clear without any blind guidance, blind leading the blind sort of thing. Because what happens is now there's a clear execution of what needs to be done, and there's someone to help guide you through that process. So that's very, very important. Coaching and mentoring makes sure that whatever you're doing, you're going in the right direction. And this particular type of intervention I've seen very, very common in the call center world, as the world I come from, in an administrative setting as well, but very, very, very key and very common in a call center world. Let's continue. Career planning and development. This intervention helps people choose organizations and career paths and attain career objectives, and generally focuses on managers and professional staff. This is more, I think, will be focused on leadership more so than anything. However, it can be on an entry level of focus as well. Just depends on the position. Next, we have management and leadership. Brings us right into management and leadership. The change program makes human resources practices more responsive to a variety of individual needs, such as the increasing number of women, ethnic minorities, and physically and mentally challenged people on the workforce. I think it's so important for leadership to make sure that their company is diverse in reference to being what's being on top of the different people in our world. We live in a melting pot. Everybody doesn't need to look the same in the company or act the same. It's not a clear representation, and it's also not a good thing for products and consuming. If you're trying to sell your products to everyone, you need everyone to be represented at an internal level as well. It just shows that the company is up to speed with what's going on in the world today. Let's continue. Managing workforce diversity. And I hope that I'm not going too fast, but this is a lot of material, so I just try to want to get it done really fast, and then we'll go back and discuss what we need to discuss. Managing workforce diversity. The change program makes human resource practices more responsive to a variety of individual needs, such as the increasing number of women and ethnic minorities and physically mentally challenged in the workplace. Oh, sorry about that. That's a duplicate. That is a duplicate. All right. So that's a duplicate file. Sorry about that. All right. So the next one is employee stress and wellness. These interventions include employees assistance programs, EAPs, stress management. These types of programs allow employees resources to counselors and helps reduce stress levels due to on-the-job stressors as well as within their personal life. Now, I myself really, really, really favor this type of program, being that I come from a counseling background. Simply put, because the number one top stressor for most people has to do with either their job or their spouse. And more so their job, more so than anything. I think it's so important for jobs to understand the stressors that come along with various positions, and also support their workers and making sure that they are not burning out. Burnout is real. And I think for the growth of any industry, that being able to recognize those times in which burnout is more prevalent than others and being supportive within that is so very important for any organization. Let's continue. Strategic interventions. These particular interventions are implemented organization wide and bring about a fit between business strategy, structure, culture, and the larger environment. And the interventions derive from the disciplines of strategic management, organization theory, economics, and anthropology. The following are strategic interventions: integrated strategic change, organization design, culture change, mergers and acquisitions, alliance networks, self-designing organizations, organization learning and knowledge management, and built to change organizations. So let's take a look at each one of these. Integrated strategic change. A strategic change helps members manage the transition between a current strategy and organization design and desired future strategic orientation. Pretty self-explanatory there. Move on to the next. Organization design. The intervention addresses the organization's architecture or the extent to which the structure, work design, human resource practices, and management and information systems are in alignment and support of each other. This, I feel like, is very important because at times, have you ever been to a company or worked for a company and it seems like HR is separate from the rest of the company. That's a prime example where it's not, it doesn't flow and it's not fluid. It doesn't seem that they're cohesive on one accord, and that is not good. You want the company to be culture to feel like it's one, and that brings us to culture change. The intervention helps organizations develop cultures, beliefs, norms, behaviors, and values appropriate to their strategies and the environment. Now, this is important, especially when you have a new company, a new organization, because what it does is it makes sure that everything is lined on one accord to make sure that they're being represented in the light in which they want to be. Let's continue. Self-designing organizations. The change program helps organizations gain the capacity to alter themselves fundamentally. It highly participative process involving multiple stakeholders in setting strategic directions and designing and implementing appropriate structures and process. I think this particular intervention would probably be a little bit more intense, being that more hands are involved. However, I think it's important to consider those who have a financial investment in the organization to make sure that their vision is also seen as important, because hey, without the money, it couldn't they couldn't run the business. The next is organizational learning and knowledge management. The intervention describes two interrelated change processes: organizational learning, which seeks to enhance an organization's capability to acquire and develop new knowledge, and to knowledge management, which focuses on how that knowledge can be organized and used to improve organization performance. The next is built to change. This approach, on the other hand, assumes that the source of effectiveness of the ability to change is continuous. So, meaning that the ball is ever rolling, it doesn't stop, that it flows and keeps going. Because what happens is you have a lot of companies that start something and they start off with a clear objective, but it doesn't get followed through, so it drops the ball. Next, we have is merger and acquisitions integration. This intervention describes how OD practitioners assist two or more organizations to form a new entity, addressing key strategic leadership and cultural issues prior to legal and financial transaction helps to smooth operational integration. Now, this particular merger and acquisition integration comes into play when we go and discuss about the case study. And we're going to go into really, really juicy details about this case study. Kind of make it simple. It's a lot of information, but this particular integration is the type of integration that took place within that case study. Network interventions. This intervention helps to develop relationships amongst three or more organizations to perform tasks or solve problems that are too complex for single organizations to resolve. All right, so now let's go into the other part of this. We went into the interventions, but now let's look at the activities that take place in order to execute these interventions and execute the change. If you go with me to page 162, you're going to see a chart. And this particular chart actually goes over the change management activities. So turn with me to the chart. And you'll see it. All right. So now, if you look at motivating change, that is the very first one. And under motivating change, we see creating a readiness for change, overcoming resistance to change. And then next, we see creating a vision, describing the core ideology, constructing the envisioned future. Next, we see developing political support, assessing change agent power, identifying key stakeholders, influencing stakeholders. Next, we see managing the transition. And under that, we see activity planning, commitment planning, management structures. And the very last activity we see is sustaining momentum, providing resources for change, building a support system for change agents, developing new competencies and skills. Does anybody have any questions over this chart before we continue? It's basically just going over the different change management activities that can occur and come in regards to initiating change within a company. All right, let's continue. Now, let's stop here for a moment. With anything that we do in life, when we get ready to change, we are humans of habit. We are habit forming humans. And it's very difficult to implement change when it comes to us as humans. Why? Because we don't like change. In most cases, we will resist change. We will fight against it. I don't know why, but we don't. And most people, I mean, would anyone disagree with me that when you try to change a habit that you have, it is the hardest thing because naturally your body wants to resist. If you're working out and you don't work out usually, if you're eating bad foods and you try to eat healthy, if you're quitting a bad habit, if you do something for so long, there is a form of resistance even with your body. And that brings us to the types of resistance. When people become accustomed to doing things a certain way, they may resist or rebel against change. Emotional intelligence leads to stronger psychological resources which play a significant role in employees' proactive attitudes towards change. The various forms of resistance can take place in technical, political, and cultural resistance. So we're going to look at this from an organizational standpoint. Some of the types of resistance that can take place. Technical resistance often comes from having made a habit using the same procedures and technology. This is very prevalent when you look at companies. Once again, I can give you from a call center perspective where if you started using a certain technology or a certain software and all of a sudden they come in and the IT department puts in new computers or changes the platform and it totally causes a resistance with everybody because we've got accustomed to using this software this way. But now to make the job more productive and more efficient, we have to move along and use different software. So that's an example of technical resistance. Next, we have political resistance. This type of resistance can arise when organizational changes threaten powerful stakeholders and executives. This is something on a more higher ground in reference to people who have a financial hand in an organization, meaning that the particular change has caused people up top to be disgruntled, and that, my friend, can be very confrontational because if you get a great example of that, I think would probably be like Steve Jobs when if you saw the movie about him at the point in his career where he ended up, I think, leaving Macintosh for a while because they were not agreeing creatively, and then they ended up bringing him back. But I think he got voted off or something by the stakeholders who didn't agree with his vision. Next, we have cultural resistance. This occurs when systems reinforce the status quo and promote conformity. This has to do with the company as a whole, the ambiance of the company. Usually this takes place on a very group-wide setting. Sometimes the union comes in and may cause some havoc, and that may cause a cultural resistance within the company. Let's continue here. Trying to wrap this up real soon. Next we have is ways to handle change resistance. Now, me myself, I'm going to say this. I think that there should be a certain sensitivity when you approach change, no matter how you approach change. If you're a person that's enforcing the change, you have to be sensitive and you have to be patient. So let's start with empathy and support, communication, participation, and involvement. These are very, very much key factors in reference to getting the ball rolling and to change and to minimize resistance. Next, we have measuring change. Now, once you have, the intervention process, we have, went about ways to encourage the change. We're being sensitive. We're enforcing the change in reference to changing the laws, policies, etc., etc. Now it's time to see if we were successful in that change. And I'm not going to go over each one of these as far as the purpose, advantages, and challenges. We're only going to look at the various methods. This particular chart was part of an article stated Strategies for Measuring Organizational Change by B. Bond, and it was part of the Department of Justice Assistance, their OD department. So I think it would be great for us to reference. It has impact data, questionnaire surveys, checklists, interviews, documentation review, observations, focus groups, and case studies. I think these are some very, very, very easy, very user-friendly ways to implement measuring change, and each one would have the appropriateness based upon the type of change. And if you have some time, go through the chart. It's an easy read and will just give you the purpose of using that particular measure or method, the advantages, and also the challenges that come along with those methods. Let's continue. Now we're going to get to the latter part and towards the end of this lecture, where we're going to discuss the case study of Coors Steel. So now this particular case study, for those who didn't get a chance to go over it, basically is discussing a merger and acquisition that took place between two companies. And I'm going to give you a little history on this really quick. On October the 20th, 2006, Coors announced that it had accepted a $4.3 billion, which in their particular currency, in our currency, is $8.1 billion, offer from Tata Steel, a valuation of $4.55 per shares. The combination of Coors and Tata would create the fifth largest steelmaking company worldwide. Tata surprised the credit default swap segment of the derivative markets by deciding to raise $6.17 billion of the debt for the deal through a new subsidiary of Coors called Tata Steel UK. Rather than by raising the debt itself, the Tata security credit rating was investment grade, whereas the new subsidiary may not be. The higher risk associated with raising the debt through subsidiary with a lower credit rating promoted the Fitch Ratings to downgrade its ratings of credit swap risk in the takeover to a negative. Fitch also stated that the Coors responsibility for the debt may lead to Coors' own unsecured debt rating being downgraded. This does not affect the ratings bonds issued by Coors with secured debt. Now that was the issue. That was the problem. So you have the backstory and you have the issue that was taking place. I'm not really big on the financial aspect, but from my understanding, it was a form of financial change that was necessary. So what happened is on November 19, 2016, the Brazilian steel company CSN launched a counteroffer to Coors at a higher valuation. CSN and Coors previously discussed a merger in 2002, canceled that late 2002, and CSN Iron's one asset would provide synergy with Coors needed import one. So they got an offer, but it wasn't good enough. Subsequently, what happened was Tata submitted an improved bid for Coors in 2007, and on October 20th, 2006, Tata Steel signed a deal with Anglo-Dutch company, and this was before. Now, what ended up happening, just to bring it out of submission, the Coors board promptly recommended both the revised offers to shareholders, and on January 31st, 2007, Tata Steel won their bid for Coors. So basically they won and offered the value increased to $12 billion for Coors and Tata combined. In conclusion, this helped Coors employ 47,300 people worldwide in 2005, including 24. So once the merger was complete, they valued the company at $12 billion. But in between that time, it employed 47,300 people once it was finalized. And then what also it states here that Coors was 4 times larger than Tata Steel in terms of annual steel, but together they became the world's ninth largest producer of steel, which therefore you get Tata Steel was the 56th position throughout the world in the production of steel. So this particular acquisition between Tata and Chorus ended up being the most profitable and also helped the job market in return as well. So when you look at change as a whole in reference on an organizational level, you have to look at the big picture. And that brings us to the conclusion. Um, does anyone have any questions? I know this was a lot and you may want to go back over it. That's why I have the case study printed out for you guys. And I also ask that you go back through and just take a brief look. And the reason why I feel this is important is because as organization development practitioners and also industrial organizational psychologists, being able to propose change on an organizational level and why it's beneficial, and being able to grasp the best approach as far as intervention, as far as methods. It's important to know that everything doesn't work for everybody in every company. So you want to do your research and you want to make sure that you're implementing the best interventions and change that benefits not only just the company and as far as the stakeholders, but as a company wholeheartedly all the way down to entry level. So, does anyone have any questions? Awesome, awesome, awesome. I really enjoyed your time. I hope I didn't take up much of your time. I hope I was able to explain this as clearly as possible, but take some time to read over it yourself. There are some great references on the last page that you can reference into, which I found some very interesting information, especially the Department of Justice assistance in reference to how they implemented change within the department. Very good read. You guys have an awesome day, and thank you so much for your time.